Hey everyone. I'm taking on coordination compensation techniques, and that's not a new concept for us, but we usually look at it in the context of ADLs. Pardon me. But since Angela covered that so well, I'm going to look at more like in the world of IADLs. Some of the activities that we're going to be doing in relation to coordination compensation techniques, there's name signing exercises in which a lot of it is just kind of improvement by repetition. So the symptom that most of us know with Parkinson's is the shakiness, tremors, instability with like fine motor, with wrist, with fingers. And so the tremors is a lot of times it's more of like an episodic thing where you have like small periods of extreme shakiness. But with most Parkinson's patients, there's a generalized shakiness that is pervasive. It's just kind of always happening. So one of the ways that is most problematic is with anytime you're writing or drawing, signing your name. So one of the exercises with the name signing is just a lot of times they'll give you shapes. It'll be a piece of paper. I know the professor uploaded it. It's a piece of paper with, two solid lines and then a dotted perforated line. And then they'll give you different shapes and designs to just emulate across each row. And that's just, like I said, practicing improvement by repetition. Mazes are another one. It can be easy or complex. The focus is not on the completion of the maze, but it's on the ability to stay in between the lines. So, and with the handwriting too, there's something called micrographia, which is the tendency for handwriting and lettering to get really clumped up and tiny. There's some examples in the handout. So one of the ways that they counter that is with wrist weights. So wrist weights are usually just they look like big wristbands. There's little sand in them as weights. I'm sure most of us have probably seen them. So I'm going to show video examples of writing, doing these exercises with and without the wrist weights. And another one is this is definitely a review, but this is the stabilized proximal to work distal technique. And so that's the idea that you can wait there with a arm or an elbow, and then whatever the distal part of the hand or the distal appendage, that's going to be doing the primary work of the task. Another one is practicing two-handed techniques. I guess the best example of that, if you're putting groceries away, normally you would open up the refrigerator and then put all of the heavy stuff in, which is fine for us. But if somebody has Parkinson's, maybe a way that they could counter that is to open up the refrigerator and just leave it open for 5-10 minutes while you put groceries away. So you could take a gallon of milk with both hands, put it away, take a big gallon of juice, put it away, and not worry about how long it's taking, because that's another component of Parkinson's, is just the amount of time that it takes people to complete tasks that would take us, a couple of minutes. So let's see, what's another one? And then closed chain technique, which is using a static positioning for stabilization. So I'll talk more about that. So let's get going with the activities. Okay, so these are a few examples of the handwriting exercises. And this is done here as an example, both with and without wrist weights. So without wrist weights, you're going to see a lot of that micrographia, which is the tendency for the handwriting to be very clumped together and just off center, and just a lot of inconsistent stroke motions. And so hopefully with the wrist weights, you would see a better example of a little more stability, even if the wrist weights are on the wrist and the wrist is resting on the table. Just that kind of weighted compression around the wrist is enough to stabilize for more of the fine motor movement. Okay, so you can pause the video here if you were able to print any of these out to practice these exercises. But in case you can't, I'm just gonna do a couple of these with you. And I'm holding my phone while doing this, so please excuse me. So if you were an OT and you were assessing a patient who had completed these, you'd be looking at the spaces in between the writing, and that would kind of tell you how advanced it would be. If it was, not parallel at all, that would be something to look at. And then again, once a patient is done completing one of these, you could ask the patient to look over their work and see, kind of ask them to critique their own style if they're aware of how off those are. That's telling. If they look over something like this and they said, yeah, it looks pretty similar, that's something, cognitive that you might want to look at. So assessing these is important, and also asking the patients to assess their own work is pretty important. And then being able to see their own work is helpful. Telling a patient they have micrographia is one thing, but asking them to complete an exercise in which they can see the deficiency of their own work is also very beneficial for them. Okay, so this is another great little activity that would be especially fun and functional for older male patients with Parkinson's. You're taking these little nuts, hex nuts, and you're using a couple of little pencil grips here. And we're just weighting this pencil. And you could use any number of things to weight a pencil or a pen. But these nuts are great because older male patients, anything with metal or tools or any functional things like that kind of helps promote that sense of accomplishment, and also just give them something familiar that they appreciate. All older males like anything tool related, and then top it off with another pencil capper, and you got a little weighted pencil. Okay, so these are a few examples of the handwriting exercises, and this is done here as an example both with and without wrist weights. So without wrist weights, you're going to see a lot of that micrographia, which is the tendency for the handwriting to be very clumped together and just off-center, and just a lot of inconsistent stroke motions. And so hopefully with the wrist weights, you would see a better example of a little more stability, even if the wrist weights are on the wrist and the wrist is resting on the table. Just that kind of weighted compression around the wrist is enough to stabilize for more of the fine motor movement. Okay, so I won't do every single one of these exercises with you. I think it's helpful to have it in front of you the way the professor uploaded it, just to see what these tests look like. For a patient that wasn't really into handwriting or drawing or anything creative like that, this is probably not going to be a fun activity for them. If it's an assessment that needs to be done, that's one thing. But if somebody is not into the creative stuff, you probably wouldn't want to ask them to do this for any longer than they had to. Ooh, look at that one, that's bad. So now let's move on to the weighted silverware. So just by looking at this, it looks a lot like the built-up silverware that we've looked at for patients who are maybe a CVA patient who has grasp and release issues. That's what this looks like. But if you were to actually pick it up, this spoon weighs over a pound. And it's not about the thickness of the spoon so much as it's about the weight of the spoon. So again, the weighted silverware is the same idea as the wrist weights. It's just really meant to counteract the shakiness of the tremors, and just general hand shakiness. The tremors, they can look like spells, periodic episodes where they're kind of exacerbated and they're worse. But aside from tremors, a lot of Parkinson's patients, especially after it's progressed for a number of years, it's just going to be a general shakiness. If you have somebody hold their hand out, it's definitely noticeable. And so for a task that requires more stable movement, like eating, is going to be big for that. And then there's a tool called a rocker knife that looks like a regular knife with a very long curved edge. And we looked at this with arthritis, and it was really meant to avoid the pushing. It's really meant to avoid the strain and the pushing motion of a regular knife. And so it's just kind of more like a sawing motion instead. All right, so since we typically are not going to have to worry about shakiness or hand tremors or steadiness, I'm going to show you how we would normally do it, as in me and you, our age class, and then I'll show you what you would do for to maybe recommend somebody with Parkinson's for filling these water bottles with a powdered juice packet. Okay, so we're just twisting off the cap here. This is a little, I don't know, one-time use powdered packet, whatever you want to call it, of this is cherry pomegranate that we're going with right now. So just dump it like that. Then we fill it with water. Put the cap back on. Give it a little shaky. Okay, so we're going to walk up. Whatever arm is leaning is the arm that is kind of your gross assist, your helper hand. The free hand is what's going to be doing most of the task, right? So we're going to hold it with our left hand. We're going to twist the cap off. We're going to put that down. Here's a new packet. So you can do either one, but I think what would be easier is to hold it with your free hand and then tear with your other hand. Now this is kind of the substantial part, is that whatever stabilizing hand you're using, whatever arm you're using for stabilization, that's going to pour. So we're going to kind of dump it in there like that. And it seems like a simple, like it looks like the one that I just did, but you're not holding it over. If you're having shakiness, you're going to, move it all over, you're going to spill it, you're going to have trouble holding this. So if you do it this way, you really don't even have to hold the water bottle. Okay, now we're going to fill up the water bottle. So you turn on the water, and you're still leaning like this. Like that. And you can grab the cap, and you can put it on that way. You could also hold it with your free hand and put the cap on that way. Putting caps on if you're dealing with tremors and shakiness is kind of an issue sometimes. So then with your stable hand, you can shake it that way. You can shake it with your free hand. All right, so this is the last one that we're going to have time for. This is the using two hands for a task. Another one that's not a new concept for us. It's along the lines of energy conservation, and this could be applied to anything that's over 5 pounds. So I simulated some groceries over there on the counter. So I'm just going to show you the best way that you could put those away instead of the way that we would normally open up the refrigerator, put milk away, put juice away, put away the heavy items, and then close the fridge. So here we go. So you can leave the fridge open, leave it propped open for a couple minutes, that's okay. And then, like I said, anything, even if it's over a couple pounds, use 2 hands to put it in, a lot easier that way.